following the midterms, whatever the result may be, but if the House flips and the Democrats end up taking it back, how will you work with the Trump administration? I mean, it's one thing to work on bipartisan bills with other legislators, but will you be able to negotiate with the Trump administration to directly advance legislation?
Well, let me start. From my days in local government to now my tenure representing the Central Coast in Congress, I've always strived to find opportunities to work together. And I've always said, and I continue to say, that I will work with anyone who's willing to put our country over party first, who's willing to find solutions to improve the lives of our residents. And for me, it's the residents of the Central Coast that I represent. And if any of my colleagues, Democrats or Republicans, including this president, is willing to engage and to put forth solutions or policies that will do that, improve the lives of the residents that I represent, I am more than glad to work with them and to co-sponsor legislation or policies. I've done that today and will continue to do so.
So let's look back a little bit on the bills that you helped sponsor, co-sponsor, voted for or against. Let's start off with kind of giving a general overview of, let me ask, what do you think your area of policy expertise is? You know, some legislators might be foreign policy buffs, budget hawks, or all about focusing on public safety or public sectors. What do you think you do well in, and have you done it well?
Well, I would say, I think as members of Congress, there's not one specific area, but a number of areas. Certainly, I sit on the Armed Services Committee, and I believe that when it comes to ensuring our national security and that our operations and our troops and that we have an investment in all the things we need to have in place to ensure our national security, I think that's an area that I've been able to develop and know firsthand, and have been able to sponsor a number of legislative initiatives that have been good for the district. For instance, I've been able to move forward funding opportunities for both Cal Poly and UCSB that help Department of Defense partnerships with our academic institutions to work on a number of technology opportunities and products. That's one. I think another one has been working in a bipartisan way when at all possible. I've worked, again, to address our water security issues by sponsoring legislation in a bipartisan way to increase water security for our area. I've worked on a number of veterans benefits and programs in a bipartisan way. And so I've been able to work on a number of important issues that are important to the Central Coast, including legislation that would help mitigate the impacts of those jobs that will be displaced with the closure of the Diablo Canyon power plant. And again, these are just a number of the issues that I've been able to work on. When you consider the disasters and the tragic Montecito debris flow, I'm proud that in a bipartisan way, we were able for once, for the first time, establish a $2.4 billion annual fund that will now help our U.S. Forest Service have the resources to fight and prevent fires by doing fuels management, by doing fuel breaks, by doing the types of activities that will help us not only create a better ecosystem, but prevent fires. So I think on all the issues that I said were important, that I felt based on what residents from the Central Coast told me were important, I've been able to work on those, including saving the Affordable Care Act, which has done so much to increase health care for residents throughout the country and here on the Central Coast.
Well, it looks as though you were able to, have some bipartisan agreement on areas specific to environment protection, you know, the water security, things like that. What about other things like women's reproductive rights or LGBT rights, things like that, other civil rights? Like, what about those areas? Or have you reached any bipartisanship in bills specific to those interests?
I think some areas and issues lend themselves more to bipartisanship. Certainly, it's not for a lack of trying. I have had a number of conversations and a number of issues that have come up. I have done my best to achieve that. We've done that on immigration reform. The USA Act is one example. When it comes to reproductive health care, there seems to be a divide on being pro-choice or pro-life. And that's the one area that has been more challenging, and I think creating a bipartisan common ground, that has been a challenging area.
Have you done anything to try and mitigate that?
Absolutely. I'm part of a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, made up of 48 members of the House of Representatives, half Republicans, half Democrats. And we strive and are committed to taking on those hard issues and trying to find areas where we do agree. And we've done that on infrastructure, we've done that on immigration, and we've done that on healthcare. But again, it's going to be a long journey to achieve more bipartisanship, and something that I am committed to.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about immigration. What do you think the best way is to go about achieving some semblance of immigration reform when the other side seems to be really concerned about penalizing or incriminating migrants or enforcing laws which people might call either too harsh or draconian?
Well, I think we can look at the 2013 Comprehensive Immigration Bill that the United States Senate put together. That bill, just to name a few of the components, had a way to secure our borders by using best practices and technology. It also had a guest worker program that would today help many of our farmers who are short of the labor supply that they need to have. It would have provided a path to citizenship. And in contemporary times, I would argue it would also lend itself to providing a bipartisan opportunity to address the DACA student issue that we have not been able to achieve collectively. But there are bipartisan bills that are a good blueprint for us to be able to achieve good comprehensive immigration reform.
It seems as though obviously a lot on the other side of the aisle. The immigration bill up to now seems to really focus on deportation, building border security walls. You know, that seems to be, when that's the baseline of the parties, you know, of that party, what strategy do you have to propose a middle-of-the-road immigration policy when the other party tends to deal on extremes?
Well, all you can do is just continue to make the argument, to show the fallacy when things are proposed that are not fiscally prudent. An example is this wall that keeps coming up time and time again. And you have members on both sides of the aisle who think that is not being fiscally responsible. It is not an effective way of dealing with securing our borders. It just has become an ideological monument of some kind that for some means a way of closing our borders. But we all know that there are already many walls that have prevented that. And I think there's a bipartisan school of thought that believe that the way to secure our borders is by being smart, using technology, and using best practices, and not getting caught up on some symbolic, ineffective wall that's basically a waste of money.
What are the specific technologies and practices?
Well, I think there's technology that provides reconnaissance. There is technology that also are actually monitors to see when there is activity in the area. I think you could have more outposts. There is a lot you can do that certainly could help with that border security. We have unmanned vehicles now that can also be used. in terms of technology. So there's a lot, and like I said, I think there is a school of thought, a bipartisan school of thought, that we could do better than just develop a waste of taxpayer money and have some symbolic wall that has now become, for some, a sign of whether we are achieving our goal to secure our border. But I will submit to you, I think securing our border, the majority school of thought is that we can do that smartly.
Smartly as in financially?
Financially and effectiveness, technologically.
Okay. Let's shift to offshore oil drilling. And I remember I was there when you did your press conference in Santa Barbara, on your first term, when you introduced your first bill, the California Clean Coast Act. So, how would you be able to call that measure bipartisan? For example, that California Clean Coast Act, which seems to be a stable position for one faction of one party, and can be seen as a particularly kind of leftist policy. Is it?
Well, I would say that, I worked to achieve bipartisanship quite often, but not on everything. And certainly, the California Clean Coast Act is a piece of legislation that would prevent future offshore oil development off our California coast and here on the Central Coast. And I think would help us once and for all move towards investing in renewable energy and renewable energy jobs, which I think is the future of our economy.
And all right, so let's look back on some of the bills that you've introduced. So far as we know, these things take a long time, but it looks as though nothing that you've been able to sponsor, propose, has made it out of the committee once it's been introduced, nor have votes been scheduled for the majority of these bills. Whatever the reason that may be, do you feel on your end you might have to modify some of your policies or the legislative process, given the fact that so many still remains in committee? Why or why not?
Well, let me identify things that have passed. There's the Gold Star Family bill that I co-sponsored with my Republican colleague, Mr. Don Bacon from Nebraska. That not only passed both chambers, the president has actually signed it. When we consider the fire fund that's been created, $2.4 billion, that was approved in a bipartisan fashion. And when we consider the 20 Black Hawk helicopters that I've been able to get for California's National Guard, who will help us fight future fires, that's another bipartisan effort that has culminated with success. When we consider the grant opportunities through the legislative National Defense Authorization Act for Cal Poly and UCSB, those are, for Cal Poly, it was $5 million for their high performance lab. That was part of legislation that I was a part of and in moving forward. So I think despite being a freshman and despite being in the minority, I feel that there's been enough opportunities where I've been able to move forward. Some successes for the district that I think will go a long way to improve the quality of life or help our region.
Well, let's look at one particular bill that actually it's an ongoing garnering of national media attention, especially given how many shootings there's been. Let's look at HR 2598, the Gun Violence Restraining Order Act of 2017. I believe you introduced it in May 23rd, 2017,
yes.
Correct? What is the current status of that bill right now?
The Republican leadership has not allowed it to move forward for a hearing. Mm-hmm. But I'm happy to report to you that it's a bipartisan bill. A number of my Republican colleagues have joined a number of Democrats in supporting and co-sponsoring that legislation. It's really unfortunate that it has not moved forward, either in committee or actually brought to the floor for a vote. We've had way too much gun violence tragedies in our schools throughout our country, here in our own communities in Isla Vista, which was one of the major reasons why I put that legislation forward. We could do a lot more to move forward sensible gun laws. And the Gun Violence Restraining Order Act would allow family members to work with law enforcement and the courts to temporarily take guns away from individuals who have demonstrated that they are a danger to themselves or others.
Let's look at your voting record. You did a lot. So what I wanted to kind of ask you about first off is, let's kind of look at your no votes regarding, I guess, bills related to public safety. Let's start off with HR 2797, the Control Unlawful Fugitive Felons Act of 2017. You voted no, it passed, and the bill limits payments of benefits to fugitive felons, and the highlights of the bill amends the Social Security Act with revisions made to provisions that limit the payment of benefits to fugitive felons starting in January 2021. Could I just ask what your thought process was behind that?
Well, first of all, let's call that what it was. It was really putting our seniors, it was aimed at our seniors. Anybody who had a warrant, whether it was a ticket, a driving citation, would have had their benefits denied until they went through the whole bureaucratic process of again, putting forth information to be able to continue the benefits. I thought that was a needless barrier for our seniors to continue to readily get their benefits that they are entitled to.
Okay, and let's look at HR 3003, the No Sanctuary for Criminals Act. You voted no. The House bill passed in June 2017, and I believe right now the status the Senate received it as July 2017. Again, same question, thought process.
Well, again, the way to address our immigration challenges are to move comprehensive immigration forward. And what that bill attempted to do is to penalize our law enforcement agencies from having access to grant funding to continue to do their work. That's all that was. It was a political effort to make a political statement that would have taken resources away from our law enforcement agencies. Now, I don't think that's what Congress ought to be doing. So I voted against it for that reason.
So it had nothing to do with whether, because there's this public sentiment, or at least there's this general knowledge and assumption that these cities that aren't abiding by certain rules, whether it's regarding deportation for felons and things like that, they're going to be just cut funding. So is that sentiment completely?
Well, whether you agree with those policies or not,
mm-hmm.
Congress was getting into the business of taking resources away from our law enforcement. And I really felt that that was not the way to address that issue. Taking resources away from our law enforcement personnel that day in and day out have a job to do is not the way you go about getting an outcome that you're trying to achieve.
All right, let's look at HR 3004, last one. Ooh, the Cates Law, you voted no. The House bill, I believe it passed June 2017. So you voted no. Same question, what was your thought process behind that?
Great. Well, what that law did was also criminalize those seeking asylum in this country, children and families seeking asylum. The other thing that it did is it also criminalized victims of sex trafficking. I put forth an amendment that would have modified the law to not criminalize those seeking asylum. It would not have criminalized those that are victims of sex trafficking, but the Republican leadership did not accept my amendment. So I'm willing, as I have demonstrated with the legislation that I have supported in other instances, where strong penalties are put in place for anyone who is here without documentation, who commits crimes, to ensure that penalties and that those individuals who create or commit violent crimes are brought to justice. But I'm not about to move forward and support legislation that goes too far, that criminalizes victims of sex trafficking or criminalizes individuals seeking asylum to this country. That is not good public policy.
So do you feel like that law would not be applied equally to all sides of the spectrum, from actual convicted felons or misdemeanors to, like you said, people that are just searching for...
I'm saying that law went too far by criminalizing innocent people. And I didn't think that was appropriate.
So what do you feel specifically could be done in the absence of Kate's law in order to balance the interests of public safety and also not incriminate people?
Absolutely. Well, there's a number of pieces of legislation that have come forward that I have supported that would increase penalties that for those individuals that are in this country committing serious offenses that are involved with gangs. And that is why Santa Barbara County's district attorney came forward recently and made those statements, because I have worked with her on trying to secure resources so that they could continue moving forward with some of the court cases that they're currently involved with. And again, I voted and reached out to her, our district attorney, when legislation was before us that would go after those individuals that are involved with gangs. And I voted for those and broke with my party to do so. So I am clear on record on supporting legislation that goes after anybody who is undocumented and who has created or committed, should I say, a series of violent crimes.
So looking back on everything, can I ask what you consider your landmark legislation for this session that you sponsored or co-sponsored or introduced? Yeah, could you think of anything specific?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's the fire fund that was created to end the practice of fire borrowing. Meaning what that is at the end of the day is providing the U.S. Forest Service with the funds that they need to continue to fight fires and to treat fire disasters like we treat other disasters throughout our country. Up until this fund was created, we did not treat fires like other disasters. And also by doing that, it alleviates the U.S. Forest Service from being able to utilize their other existing resources to provide fuel breaks and do fuels management activities that would help us prevent fires in the future. That and acquiring 20 Black Hawk helicopters for the California National Guard, I think is yet another one in the realm of disaster preparedness. As it relates to other legislation, I put forward, as I mentioned earlier, a number of pieces of legislation, but the ones that I can point to that I'm proud that we were able to achieve are the resources that have gone to the two institutions, UCSB and Cal Poly, and a number of our needed infrastructure projects here on the Central Coast.
What do you feel as though was probably one of the most vital experiences or learning lessons you had now that you're wrapping up your first term?
Well, I learned two things. One is that there's always opportunities for bipartisanship. And despite the gridlock and the frustration that I think as members of Congress we experience in a world that's very partisan, we should never stop pursuing those opportunities. Two, what I've learned is that when one party controls both chambers and the White House, there is little to no opportunity for collaboration. There is a thing called regular order. And regular order means that there are committee hearings, that there's opportunities to provide amendments to legislation, to create a collaborative environment. And quite frankly, regular order has existed very little in this Congress that I have been a part of. Legislation is brought to the floor of the House of Representatives with no discussion, no analysis, just put on a plate to vote. And I think the two things I've learned is that despite the dysfunction that exists in Washington, we should strive for bipartisan opportunities to make Congress work. And I think I've done that.
I wanted to ask a follow-up to the previous question, which was, so you would contend you're not soft on crime?
I think my record speaks for itself. When I was on the Board of Supervisors, I helped fund the jail, the new jail that is now being built in Santa Barbara County. I worked on a number of law enforcement measures. And there's got to be a reason that the largest law enforcement police officers association in the state of California has endorsed me. PORAC has endorsed me, along with the support of many other groups. So I just share that with you because I think my record speaks for itself.
One final question, Congressman. Why do you think you're the best person for this job over your opponent? And why should voters vote for you to keep your seat and keep representing us?
Well, I think during the discourse of this re-election process, again, the voters and the residents of the Central Coast will have an opportunity to evaluate my opponent and me and look at our qualifications, the experience we have, what we've done to improve the quality of life of our communities, and what our vision is for the district. And I think if you look at my record, you will see that for the past 18 months, I've been working hard in Washington to implement solutions to those many priorities and challenges that we are facing here on the Central Coast. Be it the job creation that's needed, especially in the area where the nuclear power plant, the Diablo nuclear power plant, is going to be closed. I've been working to ensure that we are creating jobs in the renewable energy sector. When we consider that we have a drought that's historic, I have sponsored legislation to provide for grant opportunities so that the Central Coast could draw down those resources to diversify our water supply and provide for more water security. When it comes to health, I have a constituent in Lompoc by the name of Bailey who approached my office to share that if it wasn't for the Affordable Care Act, because she has a pre-existing illness, she would be paying $27,000 a month that they don't have. And they certainly would have gone bankrupt without the Affordable Care Act. And I pledged that I would continue to try to make healthcare more affordable, and I continue to do that. Addressing climate change, bringing forward comprehensive immigration reform, and making sure that our higher education is accessible to everyone. And I've sponsored legislation to be able to make higher education more accessible. And so that individuals who've incurred a lot of debt through loans, student loans, that they can refinance that debt. So I feel that my record speaks for itself. And when you compare the records of both me and my opponent, I think it becomes quite clear who is best to represent the Central Coast in Washington.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Salud.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
I am curious because I know the Central Coast is such a diverse place. The district is very diverse. What is the #1 issue you hear from constituents that's of concern to them? And then how do you address that with them?
I would say the #1 issue that has come up time and time again, healthcare.
Okay.
It could be for a number of reasons, but one, it was debated for a long time. And healthcare is one that just came up and continues to come up. But I think it varies. Some issues transcend time, but I think a lot of the issues in contact that my office has or that I get from constituents could deal with issues at hand, like the confirmation process for Mr. Kavanaugh. And I can't tell you how many times I had to remind our constituents that it was the United States Senate. But it didn't stop from people wanting to know my opinion.
Right.
And me sharing that opinion. So, but I think healthcare has always been a big one. And in light of the disasters that we experienced throughout the Central Coast, fires, as you know, are now year-round. And with the tragic debris flow, I think people have been continuing to be concerned about what we're doing to prevent those types of tragedies and disasters. And that's why I'm very proud of some of the work that we've been able to do.
That's great, thank you.
Along that same line, you talked a lot during these interviews about how proud you were about protecting ACA and Obamacare and healthcare being the number one. Would you support moving away from the ACA to a single payer system or to a Medicare for all system?
You know, I think certainly that's an aspirational goal that we can all work towards. We should all work towards making healthcare a right, not a privilege. And it's shameful that we're an industrialized nation and there's still many people who don't have health insurance or the type of access to health insurance. I think what we need to do is protect the gains we made and work in a bipartisan way, as we've done in Problem Solvers, to try to get to a point where we continue to build on those gains. Let me share a few of those with you. A public option would be really great. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, there was one senator that was the critical vote with that being included. That was Senator Lieberman. He was the one who held out, if I remember correctly. But if we have that in place, it would again create more competition. And in areas where you have a private insurance who, for whatever financial reasons can be there, the public option could exist and it could provide better competition. So that's one. Cost sharing subsidies. We need to make sure that that's no longer in the hands of an administration, but gets funded every year through the United States Congress, so that we don't have the instability issues that come about because of that uncertainty, where an administration, a president could try to withhold those subsidies. The courts, as you know, are in the process of dealing with that and addressing that. And I believe they said, I'm not sure if that's been adjudicated completely or not, but it's in the courts. We need to provide Medicare, like we've done the VA, an opportunity to leverage their procurement authority and power to bring down prescription drug costs and pass those on to our consumers, especially those that utilize Medicare. There's other things we could do. We need to get rid of some things that I think the iPad, the so-called panels that could recommend reducing Medicare benefits. I voted for legislation that got rid of those panels. That's one thing I've done. Getting rid of the so-called Cadillac tax is something that I think we can get rid of, and I've worked and voted to get rid of that part of the Affordable Care Act. So I believe the Affordable Care Act is great. It's done a lot of good. Is it perfect? No. Should we work on the gains and make it better? Yes.